Triathlon Show 317. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Helle Frederiksen, Philipp, Seipp and Emma Carney. They're back as we did 3 years ago. We're going to tackle a topic and each of them will give their opinions and perspectives on that. And the topic that we are discussing today is race planning. So how many races can you do per year and still perform? When should you place those races and so on? It's a really interesting topic and I think you'll find it very useful. If you want to check out the previous episodes with these three coaches that I have on today, check out, well, first and foremost, episode 314, which was just 3 weeks ago when we discussed taking a season break. But then their individual episodes are in 279 for Helle Frederiksen, 219 for Philipp Seipp, and 276 for Emma Carney. You'll find links to those episodes as well as each person's social media and website in the episode description and in the show notes. But before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration. Precision Hydration create electrolyte products that you can match to how you sweat and fueling products that make it easy for you to hit your numbers. For electrolytes and sodium, remember that we all have very different sweat rates and different sweat sodium concentrations. So for example, I personally lose more than 2000 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat, but somebody else might lose just 500 milligrams per liter and or even less than that potentially. Also, that is amplified by the sweat rate. So if I might be sweating 2 liters per hour when I'm running really hard in a relatively hot race, but some other people might sweat just 0.8 liters per hour. So when you do the math, you can actually see that some people might lose almost 10 times the amount of sodium that another person does in a race. And that obviously needs to be taken into account in the sodium replenishment. Generally speaking, you should maybe try to aim for replacing at least 70% of the sodium that you lose, at least in a longer race like a half or full Ironman. So check out precisionhydration.com. They have a free online sweat test that you can use to get a good ballpark estimate for how much sodium you lose in your sweat and a personalized hydration strategy for your next race. And if you want to try their electrolyte products, you can get 15% off your first order with the promo code THATTriathlonshow15. And thank you to Roka. Roka produced exceptional quality triathlon wetsuits, trisuits, swimskins, goggles, performance sunglasses, as well as prescription eyeglasses and sunglasses. If you want to go faster in the water or on the bike, a Roka wetsuit or trisuit might be for you, or if you just want to have a more comfortable, functional and stylish pair of eyeglasses, look to their range of eyewear. Today I want to briefly talk about the Roka Gen 2 Elite Aero Trisuit. This suit has been developed and perfected based on wind tunnel and real-world testing, both on the road and in the water. It is designed to provide the optimal balance of aerodynamics, function and comfort from sprint to full-distance triathlons. And just like the Roka wetsuits, the Trisuit comes with the arms-up technology for maximal mobility when swimming. So your Trisuit won't constrain you when you're swimming, which is something that very few Trisuits have as a feature. You can get 20% off your entire Roka order with the promo code that you can get on roka.com/TTS. Now let's play the first interview, and we'll start with Helle Frederiksen, who is a coach, a former pro triathlete from Denmark, and she is the world record holder for the 7.3 distance. Welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Helle. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good as well, thank you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about planning your race season and your race schedule. And the way that I've been structuring this topic is a little bit looking at the different kinds of athletes that we have. So we have athletes that are focusing on Ironman and 7.3 or one or the other even. And then we, of course, have athletes more on the sort of Olympic pathway, the sprint Olympic distance, and even juniors in particular that might be racing mostly super sprints and then maybe some classic sprint races and those sorts of things. So first of all, do you think that is it possible to categorize, or is it helpful to categorize athletes like that? And then secondly, if that is the case, then how would you view how these different types of athletes should schedule their racing season?
Yeah, I think that's a good kind of categorization. Like we have like 4 categories of distances that they're doing, but there are also like a category where I think there are many people that combine 70.3 and Ironman racing. So maybe that is a category too. Something like, but else it's really, I think it's a fine categorization where I would say like super sprints, like Super League, and very, very, very short ones. That's mostly pros that's doing that, or elite. I'll say that they race like 20 times a year. They race a lot. Like we just had here through September, was that 5 weekends in a row? I think they raced four weekends in a row, yeah. Right? And within that weekend, there are multiple races. So they really, really race a lot, and they can do that. And for Olympic distance, the ITU races, they probably race 15 times a year, where I think it's like 7 races in the WTS overall. So they really need to be consistent throughout the year, and then they also sprinkle in with sprint races, and maybe they do some super sprints as well. But now we're talking about pros, and when we then come up to which is, super sprint and Olympic distance, that is mostly pros doing those, on a high level. Then we have the 70.3 specialist. If we talk about pros, then 6 to 7 times a year they can race, maybe even complemented with some Olympic distances to kind of keep them even sharper and faster. That is definitely doable, maybe even 8. Depends on how you schedule your season and how you incorporate training blocks as well. And then you have the Ironman races, and I would say the best case, in my opinion, is racing twice a year, no more than that, in the interest of longevity. So maybe some pros can do like X 3 times, but really spread over the whole year. So like if you do your first one in March and the last one in November, but then you shouldn't just, next year do the same. I think that more is not sustainable than those 2 times. I would, in my opinion. And if you look at the big, guys in our sport in Ironman races that has been there for a long time, if we say Jan Frodeno, Timothy O'Donnell, Rini, Daniela Röf, they've been there for so many years, but they don't race a lot. They don't race a lot of Ironmans, if you think about it. And the ones that, are racing a lot of Ironmans, the question is, do they really perform when it really matters? They do perform, but do they perform on the biggest stage? And could they perform better if they raced less Ironmans? That I always have that question when I see, wow, is he racing again? Wow, that is very, very tasking on the body. So I would say for Ironman races, twice a year, and then sprinkled in some 70.3s. What they do, like maybe 4, they can do 3 or 4 to kind of again race, keep the momentum sharp and fast. Because for pros like Ironman racing, it's getting fast. It is getting very fast. So you need to be on, or else it's game over, especially on the biggest stage.
Yeah, let's stay here on the pro side for a little bit before we jump into the age groupers. And first, if you talk about the 7.3 specialist that you said can maybe race 6 to 8 times per year at the high end, how would you, in an ideal world, schedule those races? Would you have a couple of them or even 3 of them in a short racing block, or would you try to schedule them evenly throughout the year? What would you say would be ideal?
Yeah, so I would like to have 2 or 3 close to each other, relatively close, like 2 or 3 weeks, and then maybe even less. Sometimes some pros can do back to back, but 2 or 3 weeks for 70.3, and then you schedule in a solid amount of training. Because if you just keep racing and racing and racing, it will decline, your performance will decline, and your fitness will decline. Yeah, you can get a fitness boost from races, but it's just not the same as a consistent block of training. Because when it is you're racing, you need to recover, rest a bit or taper a bit into the race, then you need to rest and recover after so you don't get injured or ill. So it always takes like, if you do a 70.3, it almost takes a week of work away. And it's a lot in the long run. So you just can't keep doing it. So almost the worst you can do is to put them evenly throughout the year, in my opinion. So like you do one every month or every third week, because then there's no time to train. Like there is only very few days in between every races where you can actually get some solid work in.
Yeah. And what about if you do 2 Ironmans and 3 or 4 7.3s through a year? How would you ideally schedule them?
Yeah, I would also like to spread them out as well. So like you have the Ironman in early Ironman, maybe in between March and April, and then the late one anywhere from October to November. If you can put it in like that, I would like to get a 70.3 in before, if possible. But if you do a very early one, maybe it's not possible. But just to get going again, and the same before you have a mid-season break, and then you have maybe 1 or 2 70.3s before your big dance in the end of the season, which is an Ironman often.
Yeah.
I like to build it up like that.
Yeah.
And I would say for like age groupers, like, doing, 1 Ironman, but then having maybe 2 70.3s and maybe like 1 Olympic race, a distant race, or like a running race to start out the year with. And then maybe have a 70.3 distance to kind of get into the proper groove of the distance as well. And then you have your Ironman race. Maybe you have a bit of break. And then you maybe have a later in the season, you have another 70.3 that you really target. I like that setup too.
Yeah. So if we discuss the age grouper side a bit more specifically here, first we can go back to, there are a lot of age groupers that listen to this podcast, even though sometimes it feels like I do focus a lot on this half and full distance side, but I try to mix in a lot of Olympic and sprint distance, at least from the pro side of things, maybe not so much on the age grouper side. But I'm going to ask you here, if you are an age grouper and you focus mostly on sprint and Olympic distance races, how many times per year roughly would you say that it's possible for them to race?
Well, it's all individual, but I say like for Olympic distance racing, maybe like 5 times a year, and then some sprints in as well. A couple of sprints if your focus is Olympic distance. I think that's doable. Of course, it depends on your family and your work. If it's possible, if you have local races, then it's definitely possible to do around that. I will also say, like, yeah, of course we can all do so many, right? If we just go through the motion. But I really would encourage them to, like, an Olympic distance is not easier in any way than a 70.3. It is just shorter, but it's just so fast and hard. Like, so you want to train yourself to be able to tolerate this high intensity. I like to say, like, for when I was doing Olympic distance racing, if I couldn't taste blood, I was not pushing hard enough. Like, it is really intense. So it's also that willingness to just push yourself and just really back yourself that you're fit enough to tolerate this pain that an Olympic distance and then Olympic distance gives you. And if you do that, then the recovery after a 10K flat out can take a little bit of time. So and there we're back to again. Then we want to recover. We want to adapt the fitness that we got from the race, and then build some more training in so that we hopefully can progress throughout the season.
Yeah, no, it's good that you mentioned there that there's a difference between, like, can you do something versus should you do it, and I guess that's something that I should make clear that we're talking here about what is recommended from a perspective of you do want to perform in these races, not that you just want to finish them.
Yeah.
And
I think, like, for the pros, right, that may be doing these 15 Olympic distance races, it's a lot of racing they're doing back to back, and it's tough, and they travel from one end of the world to another. It's really, really tough, and they also can't sustain it, and you see how the consistency of the athletes. Like, it's, of course, the world champion is the one that is most consistent, but you see a lot of people that they just simply can't hold it throughout the season because it is so tasking to do so many races.
Yeah. And for age groupers that do up to 7.3 distance races, but not doing Ironmans, how many races do you think that they can do and still perform?
For age groupers?
Yeah.
I would say like 3 or 4 would be a good to have for 70.3 specialist. Again, it's back to time commitment and work and everything, and how much you are able to train a week, because the more volume you can tolerate and have time to do, the better conditioning you have and the faster you recover as well. So that is a parameter as well you need to think of. So if you only are training like 5 hours a week, you can't cope with as much racing, because the body is not trained to recover as fast as if you're training a little bit more. Plus, like a 70.3, the length of that is a long time if you're only training 5 hours a week. So it's a balance of how much do you train, how much time do you have, and compared to what is the recommendation of how many should you do.
Yeah. And finally, what do you recommend for Ironman? Can age groupers also target 2 Ironmans, or should they limit themselves to one target Ironman?
I like to limit the one to one. But they can do 2, but it has to be spread again, very spread, like from beginning of the season and the end of the season. It could be, that they want to try and qualify for Kona, and then we kind of trying to put in a late one in the season so that we're qualified for next year. But else I would prefer to focus on one Ironman and then do 2 or 3 70.3s along the way.
Yeah. And on the other hand, or not on the other hand necessarily, but do you think that it is beneficial to? Well, do you think that is also beneficial to do race a few races, as we've been discussing here, up to a certain point, because you learn things from racing, or do you think that it's also equally fine to actually race quite a bit less than these kind of maximum recommendations we've been giving? It's
absolutely fine to race less. I think racing very little, which sometimes we have to do because we can't race or the race is getting cancelled or whatever, then we can sprinkle in some other, fun things in the training where we're simulating racing. But there are, like, for racing, there are very many good things about it. Like, it get under your skin, it gets more automated, you get faster transition, you know what to do, and you don't overcomplicate things. And it also builds confidence, when you go out and it's like, oh, I surprised myself in this one. And then the next one suddenly just seems easier, because you've been somewhere where you didn't think that you could actually go. So then it's like, I felt that last time, on that last 10K run, so I can do it again. So that building confidence is really important. And there's just nothing better than getting a number on. Something changes in your mindset when you get that number on. Just the willingness to hurt is probably bigger when you're racing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there's definitely many pros, the beneficials about racing for sure.
And you mentioned that one big aspect of how much you can race is how much you're training or how fit you are, because that impacts your recovery. So if you get fitter, if you increase your training amount, then over time you will build yourself up to be able to tolerate more racing. Is there anything else you can do to kind of train yourself to race more, or even just different recovery techniques that you can use to recover faster if you're, let's say, in a racing block where you will do 2 Olympic or 3 races 2 or 3 weeks apart? Do you have any recommendations there?
Like recovery techniques?
Recovery techniques, yeah. I guess I asked 2 questions in one there. We can start with recovery techniques.
But that's fine. Yeah, like for sure with the recovery. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like active recovery, like straight after races, like spinning the legs is a good thing to do. Like we committed to always bringing a trainer at race sites. So in the hotel room, I would straight away be on the trainer. It's a commitment, but it meant that I would straight away be, spinning my legs out or jump in the ocean again if it's been, when you're still, after you got a little bit of recovery, shake or food, jump in the ocean and then, do a bit of active recovery straight away. And there's the static recovery, it can be Epsom bath, you can do that in the hotel room after the race. Those boots, you can have different recovery boots and massage. And so it's again back of like discipline and thinking ahead. Also like having prepared, maybe a recovery shake that you have in your race bag, so that you can get it when you cross the finish line, or that your better half is giving it to you when you cross the finish line. It's just all combination, all these small things that makes you recover faster and being able to tolerate more, start to train earlier again, and then also be able to race more. So there are definitely some recovery tools you can use. And if you think about Tour de France, after the long stages, you often see them on their trainer afterwards and then doing the interviews because they need to spin their legs.
Yeah.
So it's really important, those things.
Yeah. Do you find out of curiosity that which one, if you could choose, if both are possible, a recovery swim in the ocean or in the lake after the race, or a recovery spin on the trainer in the hotel room, which one do you think is more effective for recovering?
I think like to get a better kind of, and I wouldn't call it a session, but a better period of time where you're active, I think getting on the bike, because if you are doing it straight after the race, going for a swim, often it becomes more floating than anything else because, this is nice, after the race, this is so good. I'm just lying here. You maybe if you get 10 minutes in, you're lucky. Whereas like if you jump on the bike, it's like you would likely say, okay, at least I'm going to spin my legs for half an hour, honey, at least, now I've gone to the effort of doing that. So I think you would get more out of actually spinning your legs on the bike. And if you have a trainer and you have people to talk with next to you while you're doing it, even better, right? Then you're doing it, you can talk about all the war stories at the same time as you are spinning your legs. So I think that the spinning your legs it might be most beneficial.
Yeah. I think probably I would say I have guessed the same, but just because the risk is that you're just going through the motions if you get in the lake or in the ocean, even though and sometimes it's also nice. It sounds like the nicer option.
Yeah, like it's also nice to do both, right? But it's also really nice, you get something cold to drink and then you just hop in the ocean, especially if it's a hot race. And again, like with some of your competitors, that you can speak about how it went out there, and it's just a nice thing. And I think that taking in, that post-race vibe is just so important for the sport. It's getting over that finish line and chatting is the best. If you then can have someone that's just handed you this recovery shake, then you're already a step in front, right?
Yeah. We talked about how in the race scheduling segment of this interview about how in some cases you might want to schedule a block of races like 2 or 3 races, and then get in a longer block of training rather than spreading the races out evenly, which I think makes perfect sense. But can you clarify a bit how long of a training block would you usually want to have if you schedule your races like this? What is kind of a good duration of training to get in between race blocks?
So like a 6-week block is a very good time to have if you're racing quite a lot and you're having that in the mid-season, or you can even have it twice a year. But 6 weeks, you can really get back to basic at Ren. You can really do a lot of small micro kind of cycles of work where you get back to some strength training and some VO2 max training, so you get a little bit in again. So you kind of build that resilient again before you're building more speed and getting even faster for the next block of racing.
Yep. And do you have anything else to mention on this topic on race scheduling or planning your racing season that we have missed?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah.
So I think I'm all good.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Helle. It was great to talk to you again, and hope to speak to you again another time soon.
You're very welcome.
And next we have Philipp Seipp, who is a German coach who coaches athletes like Philipp, Sebastian Kienle, Florian Angert, and he is the founder of the coaching business Kickass Sports. And welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Philipp, Seipp. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you for the invitation. I'm doing great.
It's great to have you back. And as last time, we have kind of a shorter interview on store where we will discuss the topic of race planning. So planning your season with how many races to do and things of that nature. So what I've been doing in these other interviews is kind of breaking it down a little bit in different categories. So you have your Ironman specialists, you might have 70.3 specialists, and then you have, of course, your classic Olympic and sprint distance athletes, and you even have perhaps like junior athletes in particular that might be doing a lot of super sprints and mixed relays and so on. So there are a lot of different categories here. First of all, I would ask you: is this how you look at things, or do you think that the types of races an athlete is doing that really impacts how to plan your season, or do you look at it in a different manner, perhaps?
This is a good question, and usually I try to include everything in the thoughts we do prior to a season, and then you have like a profile of an athlete. Like, is he very sensitive or not? Or which goals do we have? Do we have to reach some points for ranking? Do we have to qualify for Olympics, Hawaii, whatever? And then which distance he has to race or she has to race, and so you get closer to the point. And then you have the outside information like the race calendar. So, and then you have like preference races, then you have races where there's a lot of prize money, then you have races where there's a lot of sponsor primes. So and all these influences we discuss, and then we bring it to a talk, and then we decide which races are on our plan.
All right. And if we first discuss the quantity of races and we can perhaps start with discussing professionals, and then we can discuss age groupers after that. So how many races would you typically say is reasonable for a professional athlete to do? And you can maybe split it here into the different categories like Ironman and half Ironman.
I think you're allowed to race as much as you are able to recover, and as much as you're able to perform at your absolute top level. So when I bring an athlete to a race, I want him or her to perform at the best level he can at this point. And so you're simply limited. And then I try to plan like development time, like time for plain training, just doing your homeworks. And so the year is structured. And so what I care about is, do you have enough time for your development in a year? And then we can place the racing. And there are different development tasks for athletes. And if you spend time a lot in, let's say, injury, you have less development time and less time for racing. So the calendar will be much smaller. And the other thing is, like, you ask for different distances. I think like long distance racing takes a lot from an athlete if you want to get to your best performance level. If you agree, for example, as a pro, you take a disadvantage of 15 minutes, so you can do maybe 5 to 8 long distance races, but you're never at the peak performance. But it's about winning a race in the pro level. So we decide to focus on 2 or 3 long distance races per year on a very high level. And I say most of the athletes, they can race 2 world-class long distance races per year.
Yeah. And what about half distance races? If I assume when you say long distance, are you referring to full distance Ironmans, or did you refer to both half and full distance races?
No, this answer was referred to full long distance Ironman racing.
Yeah. Okay. So if we bring in the half distance races to the mix here, how many half distance races? First of all, if you are an athlete that you do those 2 full distance races, how many half distance races would be reasonable for them to additionally do normally on average, sort of?
I think this is a hard question to give in just one answer. It's like if you have a super experienced athlete who's healthy and who can cover it the time after, then you're able to add 4 to 5 of these races in your calendar. And it's always to ask if you want to do it at the highest level. Then you need a preparation week, then you need a recovery week, or at least 3 to 5 days to get back to proper training or to react on training. This is more interesting. Like you can get back on Tuesday or Wednesday, but I think this training simply doesn't work if you're not recovered from the race. As long as I have enough time for my preparation, or you can use the 70.3 race to prepare an Ironman. So this is a difficult ask. And then in the end, it's asked of your energy levels, more mental, and then hard physical energy levels, like a metabolic profiling. It's more like if you have a 70.3 race in St. George, for example, yet now with the 70.3 Worlds, I think this is a demanding 70.3 with the up and downhill, with the traveling from Europe to Utah, and a time shift and a world championship race. And so the heat adaptation. So there's a lot. And I think this race takes a lot of time in your calendar. Like if you need at least for a 9-hour time shift, you need 10 days to get into this time zone. If you want to have a proper preparation, then you have to deal with the heat at some point, and then you have this downhill running. So in total, this is at least 3 weeks, this race, to have it at the top level.
Those are all really excellent points, and really good that you bring up all of those things that should be considered. What about if we're talking about age groupers? I won't ask you to give any specific numbers, but would you say that age groupers generally should race or can tolerate less racing than pros, and should probably race less than the average age grouper should race less than an average pro, or do you think it's not that simple?
For me and my feeling, like racing is a highlight in the year schedule, and you prepare for racing, and it's not your job, so it's more your hobby. And I feel that many age groupers have a high excitement level for the racing, and they explore like a new terrain for themselves. Then it's often connected to traveling. And I had I saw that many people have much more stress getting to a race, and they need time to build the bike, to take, like, it's not that structured with a pro. So I recommend to take time for racing. And I think, for example, an experienced age group athlete is, for example, able to have, like, let's say 2 times Olympic distance per year, 2 times 70.3, and 1 long distance. But there's still, like, you have to have a good planning for it. And maybe you have 2 races with a longer travel. Yeah. Some, like 1 race abroad or wherever. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Completely. I'm on the same page there with when you're traveling to a race, traveling abroad, when you're flying, it's always a lot more that goes into that than if you can just take your car there. But still, there's always the kind of, even if you don't necessarily need to build your bike from the bike bag, you still need to maybe bring it to the mechanic before the race. So of course, there's a lot that goes on there. And when you have a work besides that to take care of, then it does add a lot of stress.
And I think if you have too much stress prior to a race, then the race is not, you won't perform very good. So it's interesting to have this step back, think about what you need to have a long preparation, to start early to prepare for a race, like order your tires, order your inner tubes, or build a tubeless system. Think what you need of nutrition on race day. If you start with these thinkings like 5 or 10 days ahead of the race, I'm pretty sure you get stressed and you don't perform at your level. And you can have a great training block ahead. So it's more like a structured work.
Yeah. Also, I think if you're too stressed before the race, then you might not even enjoy the race as much as you otherwise would, or actually enjoy it at all. It can be a bit of a dreadful experience in that situation if you have just been carrying so much stress into it. So I think what you say there about seeing it as a highlight of the year and planning for it to allow it to take time, and maybe planning a few extra days of work before the race, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, for traveling, off work, preparing everything, there's a lot to do. And yeah, when I feel like I'm really stressed sometimes when I travel with my athletes, and I like, for example, at the evening after Klagenfurt with Laura, I fall asleep earlier than she did because I was completely done Sunday evening.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Even as a supporter, and then imagine I would have raced the race. So I think we underestimate the stress levels around the race.
Yeah. You mentioned there that some experienced pros can maybe race more than others. So what do you think it is that makes some athletes able to race more than others? Is it physical development, or just the habituation, being used to racing more over years and years building up to it, or is it mental differences between athletes? What do you think are the factors there?
This is hard to say. I think we see like super good athletes, like let's say Jan Frodeno or someone like him. People they get back, they go at a place where they are confident, where they can prepare on their own, and they get out racing on a super high level. And if I see other athletes racing much more or all over the world, they have a deficit in the outcome. Like they in average they are slower. So I think if you race less, you get closer to your abilities, like to your what you can reach at the best day. If you race more, you are able to race more. I'm sure you can race 5 or 6 long distance races per year, but you will have your consistency is pretty lower, or your average time will get down. So if you simply have less development time over the year, like you have less high quality training time, and we know that high performance is predicted by development time. Like it's on the one hand it's like deep learning, on the other hand it's time under pressure and training, and like consistent training weeks.
And getting to that training time a little bit, and we can also discuss how to place races in the calendar. So you actually said already that it really depends on what the athlete is working on, how long of a development block you need. But when it comes to placing races and the time between races, what do you think is enough time to be able to get in a good standard block of training between races and actually improve rather than just maintain your level? And you're realizing that it will depend massively, but if you want to give any general guidelines, perhaps more so towards age groupers that have more room to grow and a little bit less critical to get the training absolutely perfectly right, and they can still improve, what would you say is a good amount of time for a training block between races?
Or it's hard to give one answer. Again, maybe I can do 2 examples.
Sure. Yeah.
One nice example is this spring. We planned to race, I think it was Texas, then it got cancelled. And we skipped Texas to race Ironman Tulsa with Florian. And it felt, for me as a coach, it felt like I got dropped from time in the development. So we already started the Ironman preparation and the peak performance, and then they canceled Texas, and we had to replan everything. And then like my development time I'm fighting for was cut down, and then you have to think how to use the time even to peak at this point where you want to be. And so it was like, I think it was skipped by 6 weeks, and these 6 weeks were somewhere missing in the year. And then like after Tulsa, we sat back and decided, okay, we have like Chamonix as the next big goal. And then we designed and we discussed what we have to do and how we have to work. And so we set new races in the calendar. And so we had to peak for Chamonix was, getting faster, but a little bit less efficient. And then another 4 weeks to prepare the Ironman to get the VLA down or whatever, to get efficient again. And the better I know an athlete, the better I can set the times, to get influence on the metabolic profile, which is the dominant factor for long distance racing. I think this is and how I can deal with it. And the second example is, if you have like long-term goals, like improving your movement pattern, or if you want to get a better fat oxidation, better VO2, and stuff like this. I think you should plan at least like 8-week blocks. It's a minimum. Knowing that 8-week blocks are not sufficient for big steps.
Yeah, that's good. Those are two great examples to illustrate a little bit and help.
And in 8 weeks, you can do like a very good economization training. I think this is a pretty short-term working job.
Yeah,
like this efficiency.
Can you explain for listeners what you mean by economization?
For example, like lowering the VLA for an Ironman. So this is like, if you know to press the right buttons in training, to lower the VLA, it's like focused 3 weeks between a mid distance and a long distance race. Then you can do the relevant steps in this block and then start tapering, go racing, and have a good race.
Yeah. That's great. And final question is: what sort of recovery techniques after races do you use or prescribe to your athletes to use? What do you recommend to recover as quickly as possible from a race?
I think the most important thing is to refuel as quick as possible after the race. So many people might laugh, but if you have some of your race fueling left after the finish line, just drink it. So to get in the carbs again, and for sure you should add some proteins and stuff. So this is the first step to recovery. Make sure you have a proper night's sleep. Stay in training or just move. And then there are the classic stuff like, let's say ice, then you have like the external pressure, like the PSR system. Then you have like physiotherapy. I think it's super interesting. Like, I think classical massage is underestimated in effect. Like, you can start parasympathetic process very good by having a back massage or the legs. So getting rid of the products from racing, and the faster you recover in it. And then you have to judge how intense the psychological work was during racing, like how intense the pressure was. If it was a world championship race or just like the next race around the corner. Yeah,
that's perfect. Thank you so much, Philipp. Oh, do you have anything else to add on, by the way, on race planning, and anything that stands out or that you can think of that would be helpful before we say goodbye?
No, but I have to say sorry that I don't have like a precise prescription for it. So this was like an it depends on answer all the time.
I think that's where what you're doing is exactly right, using a few different examples, and then that can kind of give an idea of the thought process that goes on when you take the decision for yourself. Yeah. So that is a great way to go about it.
Yeah, and I think the only true answer is that we have to find individual ways from a strong fundament, like having the scientific background and knowing what the theory says, and then knowing the person and getting in a good dialogue and finding individual solutions. So this is like, in the end, this is my job as a coach, and to steering together to the goals.
No, 100% agreed, and it's that's a great point to end on. So thank you so much, Philipp. It was great to catch up again, and looking forward to the next time.
Thank you very much.
And finally, we have Emma Carney, ITU World Champion and coach from Australia. Welcome back to That Triathlon Show, Emma. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back again for another round. So this time I want to chat about how many races you recommend doing in a year, how to plan your season, if you will. And I think that, as we will probably get into, there are so many different types of athletes and racers. You have anything from athletes specializing in super short races to Ironman specialists. And of course, we have both the pro side of things and the age group side of things. So can you maybe discuss a little bit about how you view those different types of racing styles or athletes, and how they might think about planning their racing season?
Well, I mean, triathlon is becoming like swimming now because we've got so many events, and I think coaching, now needs to have sort of specialist areas like, cycling. You've got track, mountain bike, BMX, road, time trial. We're almost getting to that stage now in triathlon where you've got, the sprint, ultra short stuff, relays, classic sprint, Olympic distance, 70.3s, Ironman, and it's all very different athletes and very different ages of athletes. So generally speaking, the younger the athlete, the shorter the distance, I believe. And as you age, you generally lose speed, so you go up the distance. So I think that's the beauty of triathlon, is that you can actually hang around till you're 40, because we've got the Ironman racing. But yeah, I think also with racing, we shouldn't forget the single discipline as well. I think the usefulness of track races, and the usefulness of bike racing, as in a road race, not just a criterium race. I think a road race and learning how to suffer and how to really, get to the final destination on your bike, and open water swim races are really good in Australia. And the thing that they do is they really hone your skills on racing, but they don't take as much out of you as a full triathlon. So I think it's really important that people also consider those races as well.
That's an excellent point. If we discuss sort of the quantity of races you can do, maybe we start from the Ironman side of things. That might be a little bit easier, I think, than the shorter side of things. But if we have an athlete that their main goal is to do Ironman athletes, and we can talk about the age group side of things here, how many Ironman races would you say that is possible to do in a season, and how would you space them apart?
Ironman racing, I'm really surprised when people do more than 2 or 3 a year. It is such a long event. I come from a running background, and when I was a kid, you could probably do 2 marathons a year, and not that I've ever done a marathon, but watching the elite marathoners in the world, a lot of them, back in the day used to skip the Olympics because they would go and do a major city marathon to maximise their income. But now the Olympics is, such a high profile. So the recovery for an Ironman, I really can't see that you can do 3 really good ones in a year. But I mean, I could be proven wrong, and athletes do vary on how they recover. And a lot of athletes use races rather than training at times. So they may actually, use an Ironman race to get themselves fitter for the next one. But yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
Well, no, I think you have. I would agree with the general sentiment. If you want to perform in the races, I would be hesitant to recommend more than I mean, three races might be possible. It's a stretch for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
2 races, two is definitely very very well within the reach of maybe not for your first year of doing Ironman for everybody, but for somebody who's done at least one before, I would say that two is totally doable. 3 maybe, depending on the athlete, and more than that, then you have, of course, certain athletes that can do that, but I would say that that's more the exception than the rule.
Yeah, I'm really amazed when people talk about how many Ironman events they've done. And it comes to a question of whether you want to finish the event or whether you want to do well at the event.
Exactly.
Because finishing and doing well is very, very, very different things. And I always assume people want to do well at the event. They don't just want to finish.
Yeah.
That's my assumption.
Yeah, and I think that for the purpose of this discussion, we can go with that assumption, because there are all sorts of, you have people doing 50 Ironmans or 100 Ironmans in 100 days or whatever.
Yeah, it's like, wow.
But what if we go down? I think, definitely. What if we go down to the 70.3 distance? Somebody specializing in 70.3 distance racing. What is your how do you view that?
Oh God, I'd have to look at the individual athlete, but 70.3, I wouldn't really want them to do more than, I don't know, one every 3 to 4 months. Like, I still would like, because I come from the background of running, and I also come from the belief of less is more. So I would rather they did, say, an Olympic distance race or a classic distance race to get themselves ready for the 70.3. rather than keep belting themselves at that pace that they need to do. It's kind of like, I always say, a marathoner doesn't run a marathon every day to know they need to run need to know that they can run a marathon. So they do a lot of 10K races, and that gets them some speed and, works on that side of the event. So 70.3, maybe 4 a year, but that may be underdoing it. I don't know, because I've seen a lot of people do a lot of 70.3s and my body just aches watching it.
Yeah.
So maybe I've gone soft, but to do well, you've got to give yourself recovery time, and you've got to get yourself back to be able to, build and then work on the intensity and get yourself back again.
Yeah, I think the discussion here can be quite different depending on if we talk about pros or amateurs, because pros also have to make a living. So you see a lot of pros doing a lot of 3.3s because they can do it, and they can make money. They can get some prize money even if they're not at the absolute top of their game, if they're a really good athlete and they choose the right race. So of course it's very understandable that they choose to do more. But if you're an age grouper and you want to see how high you can place, or if you can beat your PB or something, then it probably makes sense to limit it to 4 is still quite a lot. If you're racing in 4, 5, 6 hours, it's quite a lot of long. It's essentially, by the definition of ultra endurance, it is kind of an ultra endurance event when you go past that 4 hours. So yeah. And if we go down further than to the classic Olympic and sprint distance athlete, and here we can talk a bit about, I guess, younger athletes as well, younger and elite athletes that are focusing on this. What's your opinion on that?
Well, when I was racing Olympic distance or classic distance race, it was there would have been 14 races a year. But that combines an international season and a domestic season down in Australia. So you do about 7 races of each. So World Triathlon ITU back in the day. I'd do 7 or 8 World Cups, which are now the WTSs. And domestically, I would have close to 7 or 8. So that was, I didn't actually realise until I wrote my book, but looking back, that was a hell of a lot of racing, and it was a lot of work to keep having to come up and perform for. Then obviously, you've got to perform. We had a World Championship was one particular race every year, so we had to have a major peak every year. So that was quite complicated. With regard to consecutive weekends of racing, I found that I could do 2 consecutive weekends of racing and I was okay. When I had a third race on the third weekend, and this is, 1.5, 40 and 10, that third race was, you could feel the tiredness in your body. And the other point that I had was preparing myself for an Olympic distance race sort of at the start of the season. I'd use a sprint event, ideally 2 weeks out, just to sort of get my body up to speed and then race a really good Olympic distance race.
Yeah. What do you think about athletes that are at the junior level, maybe under 23 level, they're coming up in the sport? Is this sort of race schedule something they have to build up to, and you have to be a bit careful with them and sort of build up to that gradually over a few seasons or years and race a bit less frequently at the beginning? Or do you think they actually can race a lot and benefit from getting that race experience?
No, I think you've got to be extremely careful with developing the youth, junior, under 23. Under 23, I don't like the idea of a classic distance race or the 1.5, 40 and 10 until they are 21, 22. So that first year in the under 23s, I think is a little bit young to be doing that, a good solid 2-hour race. I like in the youth and the junior to focus more on the individual disciplines. Like I like 800-metre track running, 1,500-metre track running, and learning the skills of racing under pressure with much less time out on the race. I really like that. And races are kept to sort of sprinting, super sprints and things like that.
Yeah. What are the potential benefits of racing quite frequently? We have talked about, it can be difficult to reach your absolute peak performance, but in terms of gaining race experience and learning how to do you see that there might be benefits of racing quite a bit?
Racing is absolutely vital. Racing, there's nowhere to hide with racing, and racing rips apart and rips open every weakness an athlete has. So you could be training really well, but a race and, the first across the line wins. That sort of do or die of racing, I think, is absolutely invaluable to athletes. And, I think a really good example, and in Australia, compared to when I was racing, we had 3 major race series going on around the country in our summer. Now we have none, and the athletes' performances have dropped. And that's not a lack of talent in the athletes, and that's not a lack of ability of athletes, and that's no fault of the athletes. But that's just the pure fact that when they come home to Australia, the opportunities of racing, which cannot be reconstructed in a training environment, are just not there anymore. So racing is absolutely vital, and you've got to work out, as you do in training, you've got to work out that balance that works for you, and you've got to work out, it's a very fine line when it does become elite sport, because you go a little bit too far and you're injured, and you don't go far enough and you haven't maximised your potential. So it's a very fine line that you need to tread.
Yeah. What about the longer distances? Do you think the same applies there? But then again, the cost-benefit ratio might be different because the cost of racing a longer race is so high. But do you think that there is a case for, in some situations, maybe let's say an athlete that is moving out of the World Triathlon racing scene and they're stepping up to race 7.3 and they want to learn their craft at this new type of racing? Does it make sense for an athlete like that to try to get in quite a bit of racing their first season as they're learning the ropes and seeing how they can best be competitive? Or would you perhaps rather be conservative at the beginning and build up to doing more races?
It depends on the athlete. So if we look at I've forgotten his name, the Norwegian
Gustav Iden or Christian Blumenfeld.
Yeah. And Gustav, you see how he can walk out of a WTS race and go to a 70.3 and clean up, and then he can go back into. So it depends on the type of athlete, but he can walk in and out. I think he can switch in and out easily for the next couple of years. He's got that ability. And then you look at a slightly older athlete like Jan Frodeno, and he wouldn't be able to walk back into a world WTS race, but he could do 70.3 and Ironman. So you've got the different athletes that are at different stages of their career, which can flick in and out of different distances. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Christian can do it as well. Because he was talking about doing Hawaii, wasn't he?
Yes, he is. And I think Gustav is also, assuming he gets a qualification, I guess the next World Championships will be St. George now. But I think they're both, Gustav is still not qualified for Hawaii, but I think that his plan is if he enjoys the Ironman, he's going to do it, and he will want to win it. So it'll be exciting.
And it's really interesting how and watching these different athletes, move in and out of different distances, and it's really interesting who adapts really well, who doesn't. That's what I really love about the sport of triathlon is that you can change the game each time in a different discipline and in a different distance, and it's always interesting.
Yeah. What about on the age group side? Do you think that there are a lot of age groupers that are actually under racing a bit, so that they don't get all the race experience that they might need to really be able to optimize their potential?
Yeah, possibly, but I mean, we come back down to the cost of it as well. Yeah. It's really quite expensive to get to races, and it's a big cost, and I do think that a lot of age group athletes could possibly use running events and things like that to fine tune for Ironman. They could go and do a local marathon or something like that and focus on certain areas, but the cost of racing is really quite restrictive, I think, for age group athletes.
Yeah, and especially, I think this is very much depending on the country. If you're limited to what challenge an Ironman has to offer, then yes, it is quite prohibitive. Here in Portugal, our federation puts up brilliant races for, of course, both sprint and Olympic distance. The majority of races are sprint distance races, but then we also have a fair few half distance races and something that is maybe slightly shorter than half distance, but much longer than Olympic distance. So a good number of races that are basically free for athletes that are a member of a club belonging to the federation. So actually, it allows you to race a lot if you so should choose here, and a lot of people do that. So you have the same people turning up to all of these races and can race each other, kind of like you had in Australia with those different series back in the day. But we have it here. But I know that a lot of countries don't have that. But actually, it's something that I find like really, really nice. And I think that it's not too difficult for federations to do that, and it's beneficial because they can get a lot more age groupers into the game, which helps with getting revenue to the federation. So, but
and
it's
also passion. Yeah, the age groupers bring the passion and the atmosphere, and the age groupers are vital for the sport to do well, because that's the heart, I think, to triathlon.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to train yourself to be able to race more often, if you build up to it gradually, or just by just being very consistent and training a fair amount, or do you think that it's more of a there are a certain number of times per year that you can go deep in a certain duration?
I think you could. I think you can train yourself to race more often, but you have to have a period of consistent training leading in, and that comes back to the basic principle of training. It all doesn't matter what the technology is, doesn't really matter what anything is. Without consistency, you've got nothing. And I think that's the same with racing. So, I always know that by the end of the season I was racing better than the start because I was sharper. And but you do also have that little bit of a downward turn as well, because you've been racing. It's the end of the season and you're tired. So you can, but you can very easily you can race yourself into race fitness, but you can also race yourself into race hell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Mm.
And when you were racing with a good frequency, did you use what recovery techniques, if any, did you use, or is it just a matter of the basics, sleeping and eating well?
Yeah, well, it was always I'd try and get out to the next race and get the travelling done in those first 3 days. So the race is on a Sunday, and I was always putting myself back together on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I expected to feel awful on those days, really tired, like a real deep tiredness, really lethargic. And any exercise I did was all about just getting the body moving again. And I'd try and do my travel in that time, so I'd get to the next race if there was consecutive weekends. And so when I got to the next race, it might be the Tuesday or the Wednesday, and I could start to loosen myself up and start to feel a little bit more human. But yeah, the recovery was hot and cold. Hot, you might be in a hotel room, so you just have a hot shower and a cold bath.
Yeah.
Icing, massage, good, strong massage. And we didn't have them back in the day, but those leg recovery.
The boots, Normatec boots.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff now that athletes have got is brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me see here. I have one more question, which is, at what point do you think you're in a cycle of you're just tapering and recovering, so you're actually losing fitness and performance because you never have time to train? Like, is there any point where you feel that, okay, I need to get in a bigger training block now because I've been racing too much?
Yeah, well, I would do that. So I loved basing myself in Australia. So I was quite unique that I would pick races, go and do them, come back, put myself back together. And I would find a racing block of 4 to 5 weeks, and I'd need to get myself back home and start training again. 4 weeks was max. I could race 3 weekends max on my own. On consecutive weekends. But then I would start to feel that it was all sort of falling apart and there was no real training going on, and it was just tiredness and going flat out. But we didn't do sprint races. That was full Olympic distance each weekend. So I think you could probably do it if you were doing the World Triathlon circuit these days. It would be like sort of 4 weeks, and then you'd have to put yourself back together.
Yeah.
With regard to longer distances, I couldn't imagine you could do one Ironman. You have to put yourself back together.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How long of a did you feel then when you got back to the training block, when you had recovered after the last race? Did you feel that you had actually lost a bit of fitness, or did you have the same fitness? Did you manage to maintain it? And how long then would you need to train, have that training block last before the next block of racing?
It was sort of in the season, so you sort of had about 4 or 5 weeks max, and then you would go over and do some races again.
Yeah.
But I would find that I really struggled with finding the speed because the tiredness was there. So the volume of training between racing blocks was down, but the quality I tried to keep. And the bike riding, there were less quality sessions, but I still tried to keep the speed there. And the volume overall was down, but I tried to have the consistency there.
Yeah. Do you think that there would be a case there where you might actually just be really kind of aggressive with your resting after the last race and actually just rest a lot and just keep the body moving a little bit for like maybe longer than would be conventional for a week and a half, and then you could start getting back into training as you described, but actually feel that you had recovered fully and maybe had better access to that speed and not feel like you had lost it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I definitely do that with my younger athletes. Yeah. I'm much more cautious on people than I was on myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, with younger athletes, definitely, it's like you've got to go to a point where you start to feel tired and then back off. Don't push yourself through that. So yeah, I'm definitely nicer to others than I was to myself.
Yeah. Do you have any other pieces of advice regarding planning your racing season, or any of these questions that we've covered?
Just, I think it's really important that racing is really important, and sometimes you go through periods where your racing completely sucks. So to get through those periods where you can't work out why you're not performing well, you should really be smart about it and pick races that suit you. So, for example, I was a bike run specialist, so I should say I was going through a period where my racing wasn't there. I'd go and pick a race that was a wetsuit swim and a hilly bike and a tough run. So I'm probably going to win. So that's the sort of, don't forget to pick races that suit you. Don't just race for racing's sake.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right. Thank you so much, Emma. This was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Hope to see you soon.
Okay. Bye.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode and these interviews. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com with links to all the previous episodes of my guests, as well as their websites and social media. Next Monday, we will have a bit of a learnings from 2021 episode, and we'll see who will join for that. But I'm sure that the topic will be a really good one. I will definitely provide some of my personal learnings from 2021, so tune in for that. If you are looking for training plans or coaching services, do remember that at scientifictriathlon.com we offer these things, and we try to make it the absolute best quality that it can possibly be. The feedback that we get is typically really, really good. So check it out, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me and inquire. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Go and take their free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy for your next race, and get 15% off your first order of electrolytes or energy products with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And thank you to Roka, that you can find on Roka.com. Check out their wetsuits, trisuits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses, and get 20% off your order with a promo code that you can get on Roka.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.